In 1892, a 5-year-old girl in rural England stunned scientists by speaking 3 dead languages, fluently and without instruction. But what they thought was a miracle of the mind was the awakening of something much older, something that speaks through her, something that speaks through you. Tonight, we uncover forgotten journals of Dr. Alistair Wren, the man who tried to understand her, and the language that unmade him. I first learned a child from a letter bearing no return address, sealed with a crimson wax crest I didn't recognize, a coiled serpent eating its own tail, encircling a skull flanked by tongues. The envelope was yellowed and brittle at the edges, yet the ink inside remained curiously unfaded, as though written only hours before it reached me. It arrived one dreary November morning in 1892, amidst a cold rain that lashed the windows of my study in King's College, Cambridge. I remember the fire had gone out while I slept, and my fingers were stiff as I broke the seal. The letter was brief, disturbingly so, given what it claimed. Dr. Alistair Wren, a child had been found in the village of Eldhollow, who speaks 3 languages long thought dead, Latin, Old Sumerian, and a tongue we cannot name. She is 5 years old and cannot read nor write, and yet her speech is fluent, recursive, and beyond mimicry. We have documented her utterances, but they defy categorization. We require your expertise. Come alone. She remembers things no child should know. There was no signature, only an address, handwritten in the same spidery script. Eldhollow Manor, Dorset. It stirred something cold in me, that name. Not fear, not yet. More like a vague unease, a sensation of something out of alignment, like a painting hung just a fraction askew. I should have ignored it. There is a particular arrogance to the academic mind, especially in the face of mystery. I consider the possibilities. A hoax, a misdiagnosed savant, a parlor trick conjure debate scholars into rural obscurity. Still, the claim of Old Sumerian was bold. Very few alive could recognize the cuneiform tongue, let alone speak it. And the mention of a 4th language, unclassified, gnawed at me with a slow, clawing hunger. Curiosity is not a harmless thing. It is a parasite, a whisper, and I was already listening. That evening, I took out an atlas and traced the winding roads through Dorset, searching for Eldhollow. There was no such village listed, not in any recent publication. I searched again, pulling older maps from my shelves. It was only on a faded 1847 surveyor's chart that I found it. A blot of ink nestled in a wooded crease of hills, several miles east of Dorchester. The place hadn't appeared in census data for over 30 years. It took me 3 days to arrange leave from the university, and only one to regret it. My colleagues were bemused, as expected. A prodigy is she? Scoffed Professor Elbridge as I packed my satchel. Sounds more like someone's clever puppet. Don't let the hayseeds tie you to a stake, Wren. I forced a laugh, but already the seed of unease had rooted itself deeper. The train to Dorset was long and damp, the landscape growing more bleak and skeletal the farther west I traveled. Fog clung to the countryside like old lace, and a few other passengers kept their eyes lowered, silent as tombstones. At every stop, the world seemed to grow quieter. When I finally disembarked at the closest station, a forgotten platform called Greycross, dusk was beginning to settle, and no one met me. The station master gave me a strange look when I inquired after Eldhollow. His lips parted, then closed again as though thinking better of it. Eventually, he gestured vaguely toward the moors and said, "Best be quick, sir. Fog gets thick come dark." No carriage awaited me. I walked. The path to Eldhollow, if it could be called a path, was barely more than a deer trail, winding through gnarled woods and stone-buried hills. It grew colder with each mile, the air tinged with a faint iron scent that clung to my nostrils. At some point, I realized I hadn't heard birdsong for hours. It was night by the time I glimpsed the manor through the trees, a sprawling, decaying estate perched on a rise, silhouetted against a bruised sky. Its windows were black, like watching eyes. An ornate gate stood rusted and ajar, and the gravel drive was choked with weeds. Still, a single lantern burned near the door. The front door creaked open before I could knock. A tall woman, in morning black, greeted me without introduction. Her eyes were pale as milk, her skin stretched thin over high cheekbones. "You came," she said, as if surprised. Her voice was hollow, strangely accentless. Yes, I managed. Clear my throat. I received your letter. I was told a child here. She's asleep now, the woman interrupted. You'll see her in the morning. Before I could press further, she turned and glided back into the darkness of the manor. I followed, hesitantly, and the door closed behind me with a sound that felt final. The interior smelled of parchment and mold. Candlelight flickered across portraits whose faces had been scratched out with something sharp. The hall was lined with bookshelves, though many volumes were missing or torn. Strange diagrams were etched into the wooden floorboards beneath threadbare rugs. I was shown to a guest room on the second floor, where a fire had been lit, though I hadn't heard anyone tend it. A note awaited me on the writing desk. You may observe the girl. She will speak to you only if she wills it. Do not speak to her in your sleep. She listens. That last line chilled me more than I care to admit. I told myself it was nonsense, a crude attempt at dramatics. Still, I placed the note face down and bolted the door before extinguishing the light. Even now, as I write this, hours later, in the flickering shadows of his crumbling house, I feel a presence beyond the walls. Something old, waiting just out of reach. And I cannot shake the feeling that the girl knows I've arrived. Tomorrow I meet her, and I fear I will not leave the same. I awoke to silence, the kind of silence that feels manufactured, as if the very air is holding its breath. Outside the frost-kissed window, the moorland sprawled into pale oblivion, the morning light struggling to pierce a curtain of fog that clung to hills like a burial shroud. Eld Hollow Manor was perched on the edge of that desolation, its decaying walls half consumed by ivy and its chimneys exhaling smoke as thin and white as bone dust. I dressed without ceremony and made my way downstairs, each creaking step echoing unnaturally down the corridor. The house was old in a way that felt wrong, not merely worn, but deliberately abandoned by time, as though the world had recoiled from it. The woman from last night waited in the dining room. She stood by a tall window, her profile gaunt and motionless as she watched the fog ride outside. A modest breakfast had been set, though untouched. You may visit the village, she said without turning. They will not speak of her, but you should see for yourself what her presence has done. I hesitated. You said she would speak to me. In time, she interrupted. First, you must understand where she comes from. Her tone brooked no debate. Eld Hollow Village lay about a mile from the manor, hidden by the brambled curve of the moor. As I walked the overgrown path, the mist curled around me like wet gauze, swallowing sound and muting color. Even the wind felt subdued, whispering rather than howling. When the first houses came into view, squat, moss-caked things with shuttered windows and sunken roofs, I was struck by their stillness. No smoke from the chimneys. No laughter, no children's voices, no barking dogs. Just silence, again, that same watchful, breathless void I'd felt in the manor. I passed an old woman tending to a dead garden. She looked up when she saw me, her expression pinched and wary. I tipped my hat, but she made no greeting, only drew a charm from around her neck, a bundle of twine and teeth, and clutched it tightly until I passed. Further along, I found the tavern. Its sign creaked on rusted hinges, half swallowed by ivy. Inside, the air was thick with peat smoke and stale ale. A handful of men hunched over their mugs, faces pale and sunken, eyes red-rimmed and tired. They fell silent the moment I entered. I ordered a tea, but the barkeep, a heavy-set man with a butcher's hands, only stared at me, jaw tight. Not from here, he said eventually. No, I admitted. I'm a linguist. I was invited to the manor. The crash of a tankard cut me off. One of the men had stood abruptly, knocking his drink to the floor. You shouldn't be up there, he said, his voice a rasp. She don't speak. She calls. There's a difference. The barkeep muttered something and shooed him back down, but the man stared at me with fevered eyes. Words are supposed to mean things. Hers don't. They do things. I tried to ask more, but no one else would meet my gaze. I left shortly after, the door slamming shut behind me like a verdict. The road back to the manor felt longer somehow. The fog had thickened, pressing in from all sides. At one point I heard a soft trill, like humming, just beyond the hedgerow, and I paused, certain I was not alone. But when I parted the brambles, there was nothing, only a ragged doll hanging from a crooked post, its stitched mouth torn open, stuffed with black feathers. The woman, she still hadn't given her name, met me at the threshold of the manor. She studied my face with something like amusement. "They fear her," I said. "They speak of her like a curse." They are not wrong. Her frankness startled me. What is she, truly? She led me without answer through a hallway I had not seen before. Its wallpaper had peeled away in long curls, revealing strange symbols scratched into the plaster beneath. The air grew colder with every step. I noticed my breath now misted in front of me. We stopped before a heavy oak door reinforced with iron bands. "She is waiting," the woman said. "May I ask, who are you?" "I am the only one left who remembers her birth. The others left, or changed, or died." Before I could respond, she opened the door. The room was modest, a child's quarters, but aged and dark. Wooden toys lay untouched in the corner, coated in dust. The hearth was unlit, and in the far corner, sitting cross-legged in the middle of a faded rug, was the girl. She was smaller than I expected, frail, with a mass of tangled dark hair and pale skin that looked almost translucent in the gloom. She wore a simple linen gown. Her eyes were enormous, too large for her face, and they did not blink when they found mine. "Hello," I said gently. "I'm Dr. Wren. I've come a long way to speak with you." Silence. She tilted her head slightly, as if studying the shape of my words. Then, in a voice that sounded not like a child's but like a chorus of distant echoes, she replied, "You've come too late, Doctor. The words have already dug in." The temperature dropped sharply. I felt it in my bones. The woman beside me stepped back, as though instinctively. "Which language was that?" I asked, heart pounding. "Latin? Sumerian?" The girl smiled, but it was a smile without warmth, without recognition of human mirth. None that were born of men. I opened my notebook with trembling hands, and the girl began to speak again. The room seemed to shift around her as she spoke, as though the very air pulsed with each syllable. I'd expected high-pitched babble or parroting. What I heard was deliberate, rhythmic, ritualistic. Her voice came in layered tones, like multiple speakers using the same mouth. I took a cautious step forward, my notebook open, pencil trembling against the page. "Can you tell me your name?" I asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned her eyes, impossibly dark, toward the shadowed corner of the room. Her lips moved silently. Then, with a strange inflection, she spoke a phrase I recognized from my studies. "Nindareka Mishishkor Yudug Holjin Na," Old Sumerian, roughly translated. "I am the vessel of the storm god, like the demon of sickness." My mouth went dry. Most scholars would need months to piece that together. Yet she delivered it with the fluidity of a native speaker, one who lived and thought in a tongue lost for over 4,000 years. "Do you know what that means?" I asked softly. She blinked once, slowly, then she switched languages. Latin this time, ecclesiastical, not classical. Her cadence shifted, more melodic but equally precise. "In principio erat verbum, et verbum erat apud mortuos." In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with the dead. That was not scripture. That was reversal. She tilted her head again, watching me with an almost clinical curiosity. Her face bore no pride, no recognition of the astonishment her words should have stirred. It was like watching a phonograph speak, except the words bled with meaning. I scribbled furiously in my notebook, writing down every phoneme I could catch, even as a dull headache began to form at the base of my skull. Something about her voice made it hard to focus, not in volume, but in weight. The syllables dragged at my comprehension, as though hearing them cost something. "Do you know who taught you these languages?" I asked, rubbing my temple. She smiled, a slow, eerie expression that exposed her small, jagged teeth. "The man in the wall." A chill worked its way up my spine. I glanced at the woman, the girl's caretaker, who now stood silently by the doorway like a sentinel, but she gave no sign of alarm. "The man in the wall?" I echoed. What's his name? The girl giggled. Not like a child, but like a thing pretending to be one. She reached out with her finger and traced a sigil in the dust at her feet. A circle enclosed by 7 lines, intersecting at unnatural angles. The caretaker finally spoke. She draws them often. We clean them, but they reappear. What is it? I asked. The girl answered before the woman could. It's a door. To where? She grinned wider. Where language came before sound. That didn't make sense, not rationally. But somewhere deep in the folds of my intellect, it made terrible sense. An ancestral echo, a memory that wasn't mine stirred, and I looked down to see that my hand had, without intention, begun to copy the symbol into my notes. Have you spoken to others? I asked. Anyone besides her? I nodded toward the caretaker. The girl shook her head slowly, eyes never leaving mine. They wouldn't understand. They would bleed. A pause. But you will? My mouth felt dry. Why me? She leaned forward and whispered in the language I could not place. The 4th one. It didn't resemble any known phonetic system. The sounds were wet and sharp, made with parts of the throat I hadn't known I possessed. And though I couldn't translate a single word, I understood it. It said, because your dreams have always been in this tongue. I stumbled back. The caretaker caught me before I could fall. My knees buckled from a sudden wave of vertigo. The walls pulsed again, not metaphorically, but visibly, as though her utterance had warped the very architecture of the room. She said something. I began, but my voice faltered. She speaks it rarely, the woman said. Only when she finds someone receptive. I understood it. She knows. That's why you were summoned. I stared at the child, whose eyes now gleamed faintly in the gloom. Her skin was cold and bluish in the lamplight, and yet she radiated presence, like a stone sunk deep into the mind. You felt her without looking. She isn't possessed, I muttered. She isn't faking. This is something else. She is a conduit, the woman said quietly, a mouth for a language that predates human speech, and perhaps predates man itself. The girl began to hum again. This time, the pitch was low, like the grinding of stone against stone. I had come here expecting curiosity, perhaps a paper to write, maybe even an interesting anecdote for future lectures. But as I stood in that room with her, that impossibly ancient thing wearing a child's skin, I realized I would not be leaving with any simple answers. The girl looked up at me one final time and said, He's listening now through your ears. The symbols at her feet began to glow, and I knew, without understanding how, that I had already spoken back. The house creaked as though settling onto my chest. By the time I returned to my room that evening, something imperceptible had shifted in the bones of Eld Hollow Manor. The walls, once merely cracked, now seemed to bend inward at unnatural angles. Shadows didn't lie passively in corners. They leaned. Dinner was absent. The dining hall remained dark, the long table still covered in the same dust and wax drippings as that morning. I asked the woman in black, whom I had now come to call the matron, though she still refused a name, about the meal, and she merely replied, She doesn't eat at night. Neither should you. I did not press. Instead, I retired to my quarters and lit the fire, though the chimney belched the smoke back into the room in thin, acrid coughs. I cracked the window for air, letting in the moor's chill breath. Fog pressed against the pane like a restless animal. I tried to read. I tried to write, but my thoughts, normally so orderly, moved in spirals. My fingers trembled slightly, and the words on the page began to lose their meaning. Syllabic hallucination, I wrote in the margin, symptomatic of fatigue or psychic suggestion. But that didn't explain the smell. There was a scent in the room, faint but distinct, charred parchment and wet earth, like a library burned and buried beneath a bog. I rose and paced. The fire snapped low. Outside, no wind stirred the trees. And then, softly, behind the wall, I heard whispering. I froze. It wasn't coming from the hallway. It was inside the wall. Faint murmurs, not like rats or shifting wood, but speech. A language. I pressed my ear to the paneling. For a moment, I could almost make out syllables, glottal, rhythmic, heavy with intent. Not Latin, not Sumerian, not any root I could trace. Just like the girl's fourth language. I stepped back, heart racing. The whispering stopped. I turned toward the door and found it slightly ajar, though I knew I had latched it. There at the end of the hall, barely visible in the murk, stood the girl. She wasn't facing me. She was facing the wall, her small hand raised, tracing something onto the wood with her finger. Her hair hung limp and damp, as though she had come in from the rain. But there was no rain. I stepped into the hallway. "Child," I called softly. Her hand paused mid-motion. Then she turned her head, not all the way, just far enough that one dark eye found mine. "He doesn't like when you listen." Her voice was flat, emotionless. I opened my mouth to respond, but sudden pressure clamped over my ears, like an altitude shift. My vision blurred. Blood trickled from my nose. I staggered back into my room, slamming the door and bolting it. I leaned against the wood, gasping. The pressure eased slowly, retreating like a tide. For the next hour I sat by the fire, unable to move, hands white-knuckled on the arms of the chair. The whispering didn't return, but when I finally summoned the courage to check the hallway again, she was gone. The next event came in dreams. I say dreams, but it felt more like memory. I found myself in a vast stone chamber, lit by no source I could find. The walls were covered in script, not written, but carved deep, like something clawed into them over centuries. Symbols looped and spiraled in impossible directions. They rearranged when I blinked. In the center stood the girl, but she was not a child. She was tall, ageless, her eyes empty sockets glowing with slow fire. Her mouth hung open, and from it poured a river of language, an endless stream of words, layered atop one another, spoken in countless voices. The sound bent the air, and I understood none of it, not one word. Yet I wept. I awoke at dawn to find my pillow soaked with tears and blood. My notebook had fallen to the floor. Someone had written in it. Not in my hand. Not in any hand I recognized. Not in ink. Burned into the pages were lines of the same sigils the girl had drawn on the floor. Deep grooves, charred at the edges, radiating heat. The final page bore a single word, scrawled in English, barely legible beneath the burned script. "Remember." I staggered to the wash basin, splashing cold water on my face. My reflection looked older, hollowed. My gums bled when I spat. The matron was waiting outside my door. "She's ready to show you the drawings," she said without greeting. I wanted to ask what had happened, if she had heard the whispers, seen the girl in the hall. But something in her eyes warned me not to speak of it. Not yet. Instead, I followed her down the corridor, past walls now unmistakably marked with sigils beneath the wallpaper. They had always been there, hadn't they? I'd just chosen not to see. The girl waited in a room I hadn't entered before, the nursery, and on the walls, in charcoal and blood, she had drawn the story of something older than language, something that was beginning to wake. I left the nursery in a daze. The girl's drawings weren't childish. They were methodical, densely packed across the walls and furniture in maddening spirals. Each image had depth, almost architectural in its precision, yet the subject matter was grotesque. Spires made of bone, languages rendered as flesh, eyes layered within eyes. She had depicted the destruction of cities that never existed, and maps of constellations no telescope could find. But what disturbed me most was what I did recognize. Symbols from Mesopotamian cylinder seals, ancient and largely untranslated, appear among the drawings, woven into complex diagrams. There were Enochian sigils, those first conjured by the alchemists Dee and Kelly, drawn in their original undocumented forms. I even spotted Proto-Elamite ciphers, a language still unsolved by modern scholars, rendered in elegant repetition. But the girl had no access to such knowledge. No books. No education. That morning, I locked myself in the manor's library and began cross-referencing my notes. The shelves were disorderly. Much of the collection had succumbed to rot, mold, and time. But beneath a stack of rotting manuscripts, I uncovered a tattered black journal. It was written in ink that had faded to brown, with pages half brittle and curled, but the hand was meticulous. It belonged to one Dr. Erasmus Langley, a name I recognized faintly, a linguist expelled from Oxford in 1854 for publishing a thesis claiming that language predated mankind. He had vanished shortly after. The first entries were typical academic notes, phonetic charts, comparative grammar, sentence constructions, until they weren't. Gradually, the script unraveled into strange phoneme sequences. He claimed to have discovered a pre-human syntax, one that operated outside of linear time. The language does not transmit meaning, he wrote. It transmits presence. A word is not a vessel. It is an invitation. His last legible page was barely more than a scrawl, the ink blurred and frantic. It speaks through her, not to communicate, but to remember. I hear it now, in my dreams, in my blood. The page after that had been torn out violently, the fibers still clinging to the binding. I stared at those words for a long time. There was no record of Langley after 1855. I sat back, exhaling. My fingers trembled. She wasn't a prodigy. She was a recurrence. I returned to my room and studied my own notes, line after line of symbols and phrases the girl had spoken. They were remarkably consistent, as if drawn from a deep internal logic. But some phrases, when isolated and reversed phonetically, bore resemblance to reconstructed fragments of Proto, the theoretical root of all Indo-European languages, a construct no human had ever heard spoken aloud. And yet, I had recorded it. Worse, the deeper I examined the syntax, the more I felt as though something was examining me in return. It was irrational, of course, paranoia, but I couldn't shake the sensation that every phrase I transcribed reached back toward me, threading something unseen into my mind. I would blink and find a word I hadn't written, or find the paper slightly warm, as though just touched. By midday, I was frantic. I needed to confirm the origins of these symbols. To rationalize, I made the trip to Grey Cross by foot again, teeth clenched against the wind. At the post office, I sent 3 telegrams to trusted colleagues, one to Professor Adrian Hall at the British Museum, an expert in dead tongues, another to Dr. Franzen of Heidelberg, a comparative philologist, and a final one, reluctantly, to the disgraced linguist Malcolm Verro, who had once claimed that language could become viral. I copied a few of the most distinct phrases and symbols and asked each to identify their origin. As I handed over the last telegram, the clerk glanced at me, then at the phrases I transcribed. "You shouldn't write that," he said softly. "Excuse me." His eyes twitched toward the fog beyond the glass. "There's things that listen." My blood went cold. "What do you mean?" He said nothing more, just stamped the telegram and turned away. I walked back faster than I had arrived. The landscape had changed subtly, not physically, but in presence. Trees leaned slightly toward the path. Birds avoided the sky above the manor. The wind no longer made sound as it passed my ears. When I returned to the house, the matron was waiting by the stairs. "Did you send them?" she asked. I nodded. They need to see what she's saying. She turned her head slightly, like someone listening to a far-off voice. "They'll see more than that." "What is she?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "She's not just repeating what she's heard. She knows things we don't." The matron stepped closer. "She's remembering, not from another life, but from before life. She is not unique. She is simply open, and through her, the language finds shape again." I felt sick. But the symbols, some of them are from cultures she can't possibly know. Some haven't even been deciphered. "They don't come from the past," she said. "They come from beneath it." That night, as I tried to sleep, I placed my notes in a locked drawer. But the dreams came anyway. I walked again in the dark stone chamber. This time the walls pulsed, breathing as I passed. And in the center, the girl waited, arms outstretched, mouth open, but she did not speak. Instead, the walls did. They screamed words that did not sound like sound. They tasted like ash. And behind the words, something vast stirred, not dead, not alive, but waking. When I awoke, a reply had come. Only one word, typed in all caps by Adrian Hall of the British Museum. Stop. I found the matron waiting by the stairwell at dawn, her eyes hollow, as though she hadn't slept in weeks. She said nothing when I approached, only nodded once and led me down the corridor, past the locked doors and faded portraits, to a parlor I hadn't yet seen. There were others now. 3 men sat in stiff chairs beside the hearth. Each was dressed like a scholar, though their postures betrayed something far more fragile. One clutched a rosary he did not pray over. Another stared at the floor with wide, tearful eyes. The third, a tall, pale man with a cane and ink-stained fingers, turned to me as I entered. "You're Wren," he said. "I'm Professor Hargrave. This is Bishop Kells and Dr. Mortlock. I wasn't told others would be here." "You weren't meant to be," the matron replied flatly. "She asked for you specifically. The others were necessary trials." Hargrave grimaced. "She's spoken the 4th tongue to us." "She did more than that," Mortlock whispered, voice shaking. "She unwound something in me. I remember things I never learned. I see shapes when I close my eyes, not symbols, but instructions." Kells muttered something in Latin, then shivered. "The word of God isn't older than her words." "Nothing is. Not heaven, not hell." "Enough," the matron said. She opened the parlor doors. The girl was waiting. Today she had drawn not on the walls, but the floor, an enormous spiral, etched into the wooden planks with what looked like soot and dried blood. At the center, she sat motionless, eyes closed, lips twitching with silent movement. I felt at the moment I crossed the threshold, a pressure behind my eyes, like my brain was swelling inside my skull. The air was heavier in this room, dense, like something coiled and waiting just out of sight. "She's ready," the matron said. Hargrave stepped forward first. "We recorded it before. She begins in Sumerian, then Latin, then the 3rd language, Proto-Elamite, or something close to it. But then when she speaks the 4th." He hesitated. "She doesn't speak it to us," he said. "She speaks through us." The girl opened her eyes. "It begins in the marrow," she said softly. Then she spoke. The language had no breath, no tone. It was vibration, dissonance. Not a stream of syllables, but a collapse of sound, like a choir of corpses trying to mimic life. The words felt wet and sharp, and I swear they moved inside my ears, crawling along the canals. I couldn't breathe. Kells felt his knees, eyes rolling back. Mortlock gasped and clutched his throat, veins bulging beneath the skin. Hargrave screamed and pressed both palms to his temples. I staggered back, gripping the doorframe, but her voice followed. The spiral beneath her began to glow faintly, not with light, but with a rawness that made the room feel too flat. I could no longer tell what was ceiling and what was floor. My senses fractured. Then she stopped. The silence that followed was not relief. It was absence, as though the world itself had turned away. Kells sobbed quietly. Mortlock vomited onto the spiral. Hargrave sat down heavily, eyes blank, mouth opening and closing without sound. "She's not a child," I whispered. "She never was." The matron nodded slowly. "She is a conduit, a shape for something that cannot wear shape. The tongue she speaks. It predates phoneme. It is the first word, the word that taught us to speak." "No," I muttered. "Not taught, commanded." Because I felt it now in my blood, my spine. A hunger, a suggestion curling in the edges of my thoughts. "Every word we've ever known," I said. "Every language. It's just an echo of that." A broken whisper, the first speaker. "And she remembers," the matron said, "not because she was taught, because she was chosen." "But why now? Why her?" "She was born here, beneath this house." I turned to her, horrified. "There's no record of—" "There wouldn't be. Her mother didn't survive. The girl came into this world in the crypt beneath the manor, and the moment she breathed, she spoke. My mouth went dry. No cries, no wailing. The matron continued. Just syllables. 3 languages, then the 4th. We didn't understand, not at first. But animals fled, crops failed, dreams twisted, and those who listened too long. She gestured to men behind me. never truly returned. The girl stood now. Her eyes met mine. The word was never lost, she said. It waited. I backed away. She stepped forward, barefoot on the spiral, and with each step, the symbols glowed brighter. I heard a sound behind my ribs, like teeth grinding in my lungs. My vision blurred. For a moment, I saw glyphs in the air itself, burned into the very shape of light. Tell me, I begged. What is it for? Why speak it? What does it do? She smiled. It teaches. And it feeds. I fled. I don't remember reaching my room. I only remember locking the door and curling on the floor, hands pressed to my ears. But the words had taken root. They echoed not in sound, but in memory. And the worst part? I began to understand them. The idea, in retrospect, was madness. But by then, madness felt like the only reasonable response. It was Hargrave who proposed a seance. Language is a bridge, he said, still pale, still trembling. If she is a conduit, then there must be something on the other side, something speaking through her. Why not try to answer back? I should have refused, should have cited protocol or sanity or simple fear. But something had taken root in me, a need, not just understand, but to hear what lay beyond that fourth tongue, to name the thing behind the language. Foolish, but by then I was already unraveling. The matron said nothing when we told her. She only nodded and retrieved a long wooden box from a locked cabinet. Inside were ritual implements, a copper bowl, blackened candles, a polished shard of obsidian carved with ancient runes. You've done this before, I said. She didn't respond. We gathered in the parlor, at midnight. Hargrave, Mortlock, Bishop Kells, and myself. The matron stood by, observing, and the girl sat cross-legged at the center of the circle we had drawn in salt and ash. She watched us not with curiosity, but expectation, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. The candles were lit, the lights extinguished. The air turned thick and slow like syrup, and then Hargrave began to read. He recited from a translation of Akkadian invocations, prayers to ancient gods, not for protection, but for invitation. His voice trembled, but he persisted. Kells added a Latin intonation, reversing lines from the Roman rite of exorcism. Mortlock read a passage from Langley's final journal entry, the one scrawled in fractured syllables. And I spoke the fourth tongue. I don't know how. The words came unbidden, sliding from my lips like oil. I felt them crawl along my teeth, press against my throat. It was as if I'd known them all my life, buried beneath the civilized layers of English and Latin and Sumerian. The girl answered. Her eyes rolled back, her voice layered in 5 tones at once. The room dimmed, and the flames flickered inward, pulled toward her body. The air churned with static. I heard thunder, though the skies were clear. The spiral we had drawn glowed dull red. And then the walls began to whisper. Not the girl. Not us. The manor. Words trickled from the plaster, from the cracks in the ceiling, from the floor beneath our feet. Dozens of voices. Hundreds. Whispering not in chorus, but in response. They were answering her. Kells dropped his rosary and fell to his knees, screaming. Blood gushed from his ears. Mortlock vomited black bile. Hargrave clutched his head and began to laugh, high, wild, unhinged. The sound of a mind breaking apart. The girl rose into the air. Not dramatically, not quickly. She floated, as if the air had grown thick enough to carry her weight. Her body limp, her eyes still rolled back. And then, without warning, the voices screamed. A wave of sound, but not sound. A pressure, a presence. It crashed through the room like a gale, shattering the windows, extinguishing every candle. I was thrown to the ground, teeth cracking against the wood. When I opened my eyes, the parlor was pitch black. The candles were gone. The sigils had been scorched into the floorboards. And in the center of the room, lying motionless in the ash spiral, was the girl, alive, but not asleep, listening. I crawled toward her. My hands bled. My ears rang with silence, so absolute it hurt. Her eyes snapped open. "They've seen you," she whispered. "You spoke the key." Then she looked past me, through me, and said, "He is here." Something moved behind me. Not footsteps, not breath, just movement, like space folding inward. I turned slowly against every instinct in my body, and I saw nothing, but I felt it, tall, cold, language without shape, an awareness older than thought. It did not speak, because it did not need to. It simply was. The seance had worked. We had reached across the gulf, and something had reached back. I don't remember how the night ended. I awoke in my room, hands bandaged, ears ringing. The others were gone. Kells had fled into the moors. Mortlock had locked himself in the cellar, scribbling endlessly onto the stone walls. Hargrave simply sat, eyes fixed on a corner of the ceiling, whispering apologies. The girl was fine, untouched, smiling faintly. "You should not have listened," the matron told me. "What did we reach?" "Not what," she said. "What listens when no one else is speaking." That day I burned my notes, but the words stayed with me, inside me, and sometimes, late at night, I wake with my mouth moving, saying things in that same fourth tongue, saying things I don't understand. Until I do, the matron led me into the nursery just after dawn. The door had remained shut since the seance, and the air inside had changed, not musty, but charged, as if the room had been struck by lightning and frozen the moment just before it burned. "She's been drawing again," the matron said. "You need to see it." The girl wasn't there, just a silence and the scent of charcoal and iron. I stepped inside, and at first I didn't understand what I was seeing. The walls, all four, had been covered completely in fresh drawings, not random scribbles or the chaos of a child's imagination. No, these were blueprints, detailed, obsessive recreations of structures, diagrams, anatomy, things no child, no human should know. Along one wall, she had drawn a tower, not a building, a spire, impossibly tall, piercing the sky, surrounded by symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. Each brick in the spire had been drawn with mathematical consistency, labeled in what looked like cuneiform, though the script twisted midline, curling into something closer to runes or glyphs. I recognized a portion of the base. It matched a ruined ziggurat recently uncovered in Eridu. The expedition had not yet published their findings. I froze. "She shouldn't know that." I whispered. "That site's only been accessed by 6 people. 2 of them are dead." The matron nodded, grim. "She draws what was, not what we found." Another wall showed something worse. Rows of bodies, kneeling in a circle around a deep pit. Their faces were etched with lines of the 4th language, as if branded by the words themselves. Above them floated a black orb, spiked and pulsing, surrounded by concentric rings filled with the same impossible script. It wasn't symbolic. It was instructional. She was depicting a ritual, a summoning. I turned to the 3rd wall and felt my knees weaken. It showed me, or rather, it showed a man wearing my face, standing over the girl, hand outstretched, speaking a word rendered in strokes so dense the charcoal had eaten to plaster. I reached out, touched it. My fingers came back blackened. The symbol was still warm. The matron stood at the door, watching. "She draws those who listen," she said. I swallowed hard. "How long has she done this?" "Since she could hold charcoal," she said. "But it changed when you arrived. Before it was fragments, memories, echoes. Now," she gestured to the walls, "now it's plans." I turned the final wall and felt something tear behind my eyes. She had drawn the crypt. I hadn't seen it, not yet, but the spiral stair, the bone-laced columns, the slab at the center, it was all there. The location of the hidden passage beneath the house, the runes around the altar, and a mouth in the stone itself, carved into floor, lined with teeth too long to belong to any animal. She had drawn it from memory, or perhaps from before memory. "I have to see it," I muttered. "You're not ready." "She's showing me. That means I'm meant to." The matron hesitated. "She draws the way the language thinks," she said at last. "It remembers an image. It predicts in repetition. She's not just depicting the past. She's sketching what's coming." "What's coming?" Her voice dropped. The tongue made flesh. I left the room shaking. Back in my quarters, I found new pages in my journal, pages I had not written, drawings, precise copies of the girls' wall murals, rendered in my own hand, but I had no memory of drawing them. In the margins, annotations, not in English, not in Latin, the fourth tongue. I began to weep, not from fear, not entirely, but from the recognition. I understood what I had written. I felt the knowledge inside me, like a splinter pushing through skin. The drawings were not metaphors. They were schematics. Each spiral, each symbol. They weren't just sigils. They were linguistic circuits. Commands, triggers, sequences, as if the language had become code. And the girl was an architect, or a terminal. I spent the next hours locked away, poring over her work, cross-referencing it with ancient manuscripts, obscure texts, forbidden grimoires. There were faint parallels. A glyph in the Voynich manuscript here. A symbol etched into a Phoenician ruin there. But never all together. Never this precise. Never this intended. And that was the worst part. It was all intentional. The language, this fourth tongue, was not a natural evolution. It was not born of culture or need. It was built, deliberate, weaponized. I thought of her drawings of mouths, of teeth and tongues and altars. This language wasn't just for communication. It was for awakening. And we, the listeners, were vessels. The last drawing she made, I found tucked beneath my pillow that night. It showed me again, eyes empty, mouth wide, and something climbing out of it. I don't remember when the words stopped being mine. It began subtly, like a misstep in thought, a note misfiled, a word chosen incorrectly. But as I read back to my journals, I saw patterns I had not intended, passages rewritten in script I could not recall writing, glyphs tucked between English lines like spores. At first, I blamed exhaustion. Sleep had become a negotiation. Either I stayed awake and watched my mind fray, or I slept and let the girl's voice carry me into black spirals. There was no safety in either state. I tried to speak Latin aloud one afternoon, just a prayer for clarity. But halfway through, my mouth rebelled. The syllables cracked and twisted in my throat, consonants flattening, vowels bending, until I was no longer reciting a prayer, but intoning something else, something from her tongue. I bit my tongue hard enough to taste blood. The mirror became an enemy. I caught myself staring, not at my face, but at my mouth, watching it form words I didn't say, practicing, preparing, and then the dreams changed. No longer was I walking crypts or watching a girl in some distant chamber. I was inside my own skull, surrounded by echoing voices, versions of myself, each speaking the fourth tongue, layered and reverberating. They were teaching me. I awoke one morning with a splitting headache and a voice still whispering behind my eardrum, a residue of something I had spoken in sleep. I grabbed my notebook to write down the fragments and froze. I had already written them. An entire page, burned into the paper, not in ink, but blood, pressed from my own fingertips. The glyphs spiraled out from the center of the page, and I at the core, formed from overlapping phonemes. And I understood them, not abstractly, fluently. I knew what they meant, not just semantically, but functionally. The phrase was a trigger, a key. It meant, open the vessel. I tore the page out and burned it, but the shape lingered in my mind. I couldn't stop seeing it. Even the manner began to speak. Cracks in the ceiling formed characters. Dripping water tapped patterns in ancient meter. The house was not simply shelter, it had become text, a living paragraph of stone and dust. The matron found me that night in the hallway, carving a symbol into the baseboard with a letter opener. "You must stop," she hissed. "I'm just remembering." I murmured. She slapped me. Hard. It snapped something loose. "No," she said. "You're becoming." She showed me my reflection. My lips were cracked and blackened. The tips of my fingers were stained with soot and ink and something else. Beneath my eyes, script had begun to form, not tattooed, but surfacing, like it was pushing through the skin. "You're hosting it," she said. Like Langley, like the others. I can control it. I lied. You can't. But I didn't listen. That night. I locked the door and took out the last full page the girl had given me, the one depicting my face with something crawling from my mouth. I studied it for hours, and then I traced the glyph aloud. Only once, but it was enough. The sound wasn't loud. It wasn't even audible in the normal sense, but it vibrated. Through the wood, through the marrow, through the walls. I felt it in my spine, in my teeth, in the small gap between thoughts where language resides. My eyes rolled back. I collapsed. When I awoke, it was morning. The light had shifted, but my hand was still moving. It wrote of its own volition, fluidly, easily, as if it had been waiting. Page after page of perfect script. Not mine. Hers. The fourth language. I couldn't stop it. I wept as it happened, mouth moving silently. I wrote for 6 hours. When it was done, I looked at the final line and knew what it said. The gate lies beneath. The tongue is the key. The host is ready. I tore the pages free, tried to burn them, but the fire wouldn't catch. They were wet. With blood? No, with ink made of something else. Something that moved. The girl stood in my doorway. I hadn't heard her enter. She looked at me, head tilted, eyes wide. "You hear it now," she said. I nodded, broken. "What is it?" She stepped forward, placed a hand on my chest. The first word, the true one, the one that dreamed us. "It needs you to speak it fully." I fell to my knees. "I'm afraid." She leaned close. "That's what makes you a better vessel." She turned and walked away. And for the first time in days, the whispering stopped, not because it had left me, because it had settled. The entrance was where the girl said it would be, beneath the east wing, behind a false wall in the cellar, sealed with rusted iron and mortar so old it cracked like ash when touched. The matron didn't stop me. She only watched, silent, as I pulled the stone loose. Behind it, a narrow stairwell spiraled downward, carved from black basalt and slick with moisture. It breathed, not metaphorically, but literally. Air pulsed from it in long, rhythmic gusts, like the exhalation of something vast and sleeping. I descended alone. Each step echoed unnaturally, as though the stone had forgotten how to carry sound. The light of my lantern flickered, reluctant. After the first turn, I lost all sense of depth. The descent stretched beyond the rational boundaries of the house, twisting down, down, into a space that could not exist. But it did. At the base of the stair was a door. Not wood, not metal, something in between, smooth as skin but cold as bone. It bore no handle, no hinges, only a glyph at its center, pulsing with a dull red glow. I recognized the symbol. The girl had drawn it over and over, in her books, her dreams, in the spiral behind my eyes. A key. I spoke the word, the one that had been growing in me since the seance. The door unsealed with a hiss, not of pressure, but of welcome, a long-forgotten breath held for millennia. Beyond it lay the cathedral. I have no other word for it. It was not a temple. It was not a tomb. It was an organ, an anatomical construction of stone and script. The walls were veined with symbols that pulsed softly in time with my heartbeat. Vaulted arches rose into darkness, ribbed and curved like the inside of a vast skull. The air smelled of ink, old blood, and something sweetly rancid, like rotten fruit left to ferment. Bones paved the floor, not as decoration, but as foundation, fossilized and carved with symbols too delicate to be human. The walls whispered, not in sound, but in meaning. Ideas pressed against my mind. Symbols unfolded in reverse, teaching me not what they were, but what they were not. I saw knowledge unraveling backward, truths that unlearned themselves the moment they were understood. I moved forward, drawn not by will, but by alignment. The center of the chamber housed an altar. No, a cradle, a depression in the floor, shaped to hold something human. But what it held now was far from it. A black, glistening stone, cracked with veins of gold and bone, pulsing like a heart. Around it, script coiled outward in recursive patterns, endless and looping, never repeating. I knelt without thinking. The stone pulsed, and I heard the word again, not in sound, but in presence. It filled the space between atoms. It reached backward in time, stitching itself into my memories. I saw the birth of language. I saw tribes on fire, glyphs scrawled in blood. I saw monks tearing out their tongues. I saw towers crumble at the sound of a single syllable. I saw it, not a god, not a demon, something that predated worship, a mouth before flesh, a thought that thought itself into being. It had waited here, in the cathedral it built with no hands, with no tools, only with speech. And now, I had spoken enough of its tongue to be recognized, to be welcomed. I touched the stone. The moment I did, my vision shattered. I saw every word I had ever learned dissolve. I saw the alphabet boil away. I saw my name unwrite itself. I screamed, and from the shadows, something stepped forward. It wore no face. It wore language, a cloak of syllables, a skin of meaning. It moved by suggestion, by the memory of footsteps. And it knew me. The fourth tongue poured from my mouth like blood. I couldn't stop it. The word used me, my vocal cords, my breath, my will. It spoke itself through me. The cathedral shook. The stone cracked. And then the girl's voice. From behind me, you've opened a gate. I turned. She stood at the threshold, barefoot, eyes wide with something between awe and grief. Now it remembers how to be. I tried to stand, but my limbs were not mine. The word was inside me now, coiled around the core of my mind. I looked at her. What is it? I asked, voice alien. She stepped forward, touched the stone beside me. It is what speaks when nothing else can. The language that came before silence. It used to dream alone. Now it dreams through us. The cathedral breathed once more. I felt the world shift. A fracture, subtle but permanent. The word had been reawakened, and I had been its tongue. I do not know how long I remained in the cathedral. Time ceased to behave. It folded, recoiled. Minutes unraveled into hours, or perhaps rewound into instants I had not yet lived. The air shimmered like heat above a corpse. My body ached, but not from pain, from translation. I was no longer a man. I was becoming a sentence. The girl stood beside me as the black stone throbbed with life. Her mouth moved without speaking. Her thoughts came to me not as ideas, but as structure, as syntax that stitched itself into my flesh. You are ready, she said. It wants to speak completely, to be said aloud fully for the first time in millennia. I shook my head, tears burning hot trails down my cheeks. But what will happen if I do? She tilted her head, soft, almost kind. Language will stop being a tool. It will become the world. The walls pulsed. Above us, the cathedral ceiling peeled away, not physically, but conceptually. The illusion of stone folded back like paper. Beyond it, blackness, a void of language waiting to be spoken into shape. My mouth opened involuntarily. The true tongue, the language beneath all others, older than matter, predating entropy, began to unspool from my throat. I did not speak it. It used me to say itself. Each syllable emerged not as sound, but as law. The spiral of reality buckled with every word. The walls shivered. Symbols bloomed in the air like parasites, rewriting what they touched. Time collapsed inward. I saw the manor burn. I saw the girl as an infant, born not from a mother, but from text, her first breath of command. I saw the moment of my arrival, looping over and over, each time slightly more scripted, until I no longer recognized which version I was living. And I saw the cathedral, not as stone beneath the earth, but as grammar, embedded in the foundation of language itself. This was not a place. It was a sentence in waiting. The true tongue poured from me in waves. It hurt. It was beautiful. It scraped my bones and filled my lungs with significance. I spoke not to communicate, but to construct. With each word, something awakened, not outside of me, but within the space between. The world began to forget how to be silent. Language bled into everything. Chairs remembered the word for weight and collapsed. Stones recalled erosion and dissolved. The air whispered phrases of burn and ignited in flickers. Reality had been a dam. The word was a flood, And I was its mouth. The girl, no longer small, no longer child, stood tall now, hair rising like ink and water, her eyes black with moving script. She looked at me as I finished the final line, not a sentence, but of a spell, a complete thought. "It is awake," she whispered, and I felt it, not as presence, not as form, but as statement. It had been described into being. Around us, the cathedral folded inward. The spiral collapsed, each loop binding tighter, drawing every sound, every word, every thought back into a single name, not spoken, written across the sky, a name that reshaped meaning itself. I fell to the ground, my throat torn, my mouth blackened, my body cracked with lines of script I could no longer read. The girl knelt beside me. "You gave it voice. Now it will remember." Reality flickered. The world I knew, trees, stars, names, time, rearranged themselves, clumsily at first, then with accelerating precision. Language was now not a tool of reality. Language was reality. Everything that could be named could be shaped. Everything that could be described could be created, and everything that could not be spoken was erased. I looked at my hands. They no longer existed. They had no word. And then I looked at the girl one last time. Her eyes were gone, not blind, but rewritten. She smiled and spoke the final word. It had no translation. It simply was. And when she spoke it, the world sighed and began again. I do not know what time is. I do not know if I write this before or after the end. All I know is the pen, the scratching, the attempt to document, to remember. But memory is language, and language is now no longer mine. Still, I try. The manor is gone. Where once it stood, there is only a hollow place in the world, not burned, not destroyed, simply unsaid. As if someone removed its name from every book, every map, every mind. I return to the site, or what I think was the site. There is no path, no gate, only a field that forgets your footprints. The villagers, those who survived, do not speak of Eld Hollow. When asked, they look away, mouths trembling, eyes swimming with a ghost of unspoken things. Some try to speak, but their tongues falter and they bleed. Language punishes now. I found a chapel ruin on the edge of the moor. Broken glass, a stone floor cracked. At its center, a spiral, not drawn, not carved, just there, etched into the pattern of the earth itself. When I stood in its center, I remembered nothing, and that was peaceful. I am not what I was. There are gaps in me, entire thoughts missing like torn pages. Sometimes I wake with ink on my lips, blood on my fingers, symbols in my skin that fade by morning. Once, I looked in a mirror and saw my mouth move before I had thought to speak. It mouthed a word I dare not write. Even now I feel it in the edges of the page, pressing from within. The fourth tongue is no longer foreign. It is mine. The girl is gone, or everywhere. I see her in dreams that do not feel like sleep. I hear her in libraries, the quiet moments between rustling pages, the way vowels sometimes ring oddly in certain halls. I hear her in birdsong that loops. I see her drawn on chalkboards before lectures. Always the same. Spirals, teeth, eyes. She is not a person anymore. She is an idea that thinks itself into you. They never found Langley, nor the others. Only ash, and walls lined with phrases in every dead tongue known to man, and one unknown. That one remains warm to the touch. It hums. I write this in a flat, somewhere forgotten. The windows are boarded. The light flickers. I have blacked out every mirror, because I see it in me now, the shift, the slow replacement. My thoughts begin in English, but end in something else. I wrote my name this morning and did not recognize it. It ride. You must not say the words aloud, not even to test. They are listening, always, not ears, no, structures of listening, things built of grammar and desire. They grow stronger when heard. You may be tempted to study, to research. Don't. Linguistic inquiry was never safe. It only felt that way because we thought language was ours. It never was. We were only permitted to borrow it. Now it remembers that. Now it wants. If you find this notebook, and you will burn it. Tear out the last few pages. Do not read them. They are not mine. They are its. If you hear words in your sleep, do not write them down. Do not repeat them. Do not let them root. Because once they root, they speak back. This is my last entry. I have no name now, no voice, only the echo, only the spiral, only the word, and it will be spoken again.